So I think we are live now. So hello everyone. I am Mohnish Katre, co-founder of ProfitBooks, and I am really excited about today's conversation, what we are about to have today, because it is with respect to the outsourcing. All of us are hearing this word outsourcing a lot, and well, there are many questions around the bookkeeper's mind that how things can take ahead. And today we are joined by someone who has helped over 500 plus CPA firms in the US to get outsourcing right, not just by finding offshore talent but by building the right internal system and strategies. So I'm glad to have Laurence Whittam today with us. Hi Laurence, how are you doing?
Hey, Mohnish, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Great. So let me just quickly introduce you and give details about Laurence. He's a founder of Impact Global Solutions, and it's a strategic outsourcing. He's a strategic outsourcing advisor. He works hand-on with accounting firms to align people, process, and platforms so they are truly ready to scale with global teams. He has worked with firms across US, UK, and India. In fact, he has helped build offshore divisions, advise CPA firms on process change of culture, and now leads consulting engagement that bring together people, process, and platforms. So if you ask me, what is the the key here? So it's like integrating people, process, and platform. And we have Laurence here to share with all his knowledge and experience today with us. So Laurence, great to have you here. So let me begin by asking you certain basic questions, and maybe as we move along, we can just deep dive into certain aspects of it, so that bookkeepers who are our listeners will get really good takeaways today. So, a simple question to start with. So, you have worked with firms across different geographies and sizes. Why do you think outsourcing still feels like a gray area for many accountants?
So, yeah, I mean, and again, CPA firms, but also accounting firms, bookkeeping firms, I've helped over the years, in addition to other businesses as well directly. Now, one of the big reasons why firms still struggle with it is because maybe there isn't necessarily a secret sauce around it. We're dealing with people in the majority of cases. And I think there's been a certain level of expectation that's been set as to, okay, we're dealing with trained accountants, right? They could be CPAs themselves, right? They could have gone and got the US graduate, like CPA license. They could have got their US EA license, right? A lot of them are QuickBooks certified. A lot of them are Xero certified. So you've got a lot of the similar certifications that they've already got, right? So expectation there is, okay, now they've worked with US businesses or they've worked with another bookkeeping or accounting firm for 5 years. They're a 5-year experienced person, right? And this is where the gap comes up a little bit, right? Is that in a lot of cases, if they're working with a US accounting firm or bookkeeping firm for 5 years, they've probably been doing sort of generally the lower end work has been outsourced first. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the right way to do it, right? It's good to start at a certain place, just like you would if you bring in an intern or a staff accountant, right? But then the idea is you graduate that type of role up the ladder and you start giving training and giving more and more high level work, right? In a lot of cases, it's very difficult to keep somebody in a long-term position just doing the same basic stuff for a long period of time, right? Now, what happens with the outsourcing element, as it's new to a lot of firms and it's secondary, and it's not like it's their team in a lot of cases, they've treated it more that way where they'll just outsource a certain type of project over and over and over again because that's their need, right? So, and this is where the development slows down a little bit from the offshore team as the onshore team. They just haven't had the same experience at the end of the day. In a lot of cases, it's not that they're not skilled enough to do that type of work. It's not that they don't have the training or basic training to do that type of work. If they've done their CPA, they can do that high level of work as well, right? But they just don't have the physical experience doing it with US clients in a lot of cases because that work hasn't been offshored, right? Right. So that's sort of one big area is that misunderstanding and the misaligned expectations, right, when it comes to working with the providers and actually getting the work done. So I would say that's sort of a big misalignment that's there. And also just understanding that you have to work on things yourself, right? I mean, in a lot of cases that I've seen, The offshore provider is doing what they need to do, which is providing you access to talent, right? We need to do a better job making sure we have very good processes in place, very good reporting in place, making sure that we are good trainers, right, in a lot of cases as well, because we're working in a different environment, right? We're working with somebody that's working virtually for us, right? And it's very difficult to make that shift, even as a manager or as an operator, to having a virtual team than necessarily having somebody sit next to you who you can just talk to and have conversations with and field questions and show them things. So we have to be more intentional around a lot of the things that we do now.
Okay. So, I mean, you mentioned about many aspects when it comes to, the gray areas. And we have seen that many of the bookkeepers, I mean, it's a kind of a radical shift for them when it comes to outsourcing, because they are changing their existing processes to the new ones. So if we had to define the readiness aspect, how do you, how the readiness would look from your point of view? Like, what is the right juncture when the CPA firms or the bookkeeper should think about that? Okay, this is the time. Right now, they can think about outsourcing, and that's a shift and the leap they should take in.
Yeah, so that's sort of when it comes to outsourcing, I built out a roadmap, right? So there's the idea is your readiness and your sort of assessment of your readiness is sort of step one, right? Don't look at the external features right now. Don't look at the outsourcing firms right now necessarily. Look internally within your firm, right? And there are different factors that come with that. I mean, the first is, okay, goals and research, right? So number one, do we actually understand all the different outsourcing models that are out there, right? Do we understand the different geographies that are out there, right? So get your basic understanding, at least to a level playing field, where like you really have explored all the options to make sure you find something that's a good fit for you, right? That's number one. Number two is look at those goals internally. So why are you doing it, right? You having a clear reason for doing it and an understanding and putting some goals in place as to, okay, where do I want it to get to over the next 1 year, 3 years time, right? Is this really a core fundamental area that I'm now going to really keep adding team members to? Do I want to always have 20% of my team offshore for, it could be, and why are you doing it, right? Is it for, I can't find the right talent right now, right? Is it because I do need to improve my bottom line a little bit, right? There's different reasons. There's no wrong reason for doing it, right? There's a lot of right reasons, right? In a lot of cases, there's a very good strategic decision from a business, but you have to be the deciding factor and really make sure you understand it. If you understand it as the owner, you're able to translate that across your team as well internally, because that's where, as soon as I start working with bigger teams, even if you don't have a fear for a job, right, or the next project, now people start saying, okay, well, if I'm keeping somebody else busy, is this going to put my job in jeopardy, right? And in the majority of cases, in accounting firms at least, I've never really come up with a case where they're like, let's go and fire a bunch of people and let's go and hire offshore. That's not the reason, right, in the majority of cases. Now, but people have seen that with large public entities, right, where there's that shift in technology companies and stuff like that. So that's the outsourcing experience they've maybe had and seen. So it's a threat to them, right, to some extent. So we need to make sure everybody's on board, everybody understands the reasoning, right, of why we're doing it, right, is a big piece, right? Once we've understood even just those factors, I would say look at your technology, look at your processes, look at your reporting structures, and make sure that those are defined, meaning are they standardized across, right? So that there isn't too much variance across the firm, right? And do we have very clear deliverables, right? And is it all documented, right? At the end of the day, when we talk about outsourcing and offshoring, we need to be more process driven in a lot of cases, and we need to be able to train on those types of aspects. If we've got things on paper, right, and really defined, now there's no variance that's going to be like, that's going to come in left and right, right? It's a very clear training and understanding that somebody can go to when they're just onboarding, right? And it'll actually help your onboarding in a lot of cases with new team members. So I would say once you've got those factors in place, you're at least you're at least ready to start, right? You're ready to go. It doesn't need to be perfect, right? But there needs to be, at least on a basic perspective, on paper, clear standard operating procedures, clear reporting, because then you can set expectations yourself, right? You can ask questions, you can make sure people understand, right? And then I would personally always recommend then when you've got it going, use your offshore and outsourced team members to help you document those things, right? They'll be able to, like, you can't just let them document and you not review, right? You've got to be involved in that, but you can actually leverage now this team that you're building to help make sure there's a clear understanding, right? So that's sort of like, you don't need to be perfect, but there should be something on a fundamental basis, like a clear structure there to build off of.
Excellent. I think you touched upon many key aspects, right, from the goals, the actual roadmap for next few years, which the firm has, documentation, technology process. You mentioned many things. So, I mean, when it comes to outsourcing, it is mainly the alignment between the people, process, and the platform, which you often mention in your discussions. So, could you take us through a little deeper, probably with few examples? Maybe without giving names, probably that how this people, process, and platform you help integrated few of the clients. An example would certainly help.
Yeah. So, and the big thing is you don't have to change what you've got in a lot of cases when it comes to like the technology side of it, right? You can find providers that have experience, right, with the majority of softwares, especially when it comes to accounting and bookkeeping, right? Whether it's QuickBooks, whether it's Xero, there's other ones, there's payroll software then that comes into play, right? There's also a lot of tax software, whether it's CCH, ProFX, right? It really runs the gamut, right? Intuit ProConnect, right? You'll be able to find talent that has that experience. So technology, what you need to look at though, is making sure that there are restrictions in the user rights, right? Because there's some legal perspectives that come into play, right? Less so on the accounting and the bookkeeping aspects. However, it's still good to be secure, right? It's good to be secure, right? It's generally one of the top concerns that people have when they're outsourcing. So, but in the way that technology is developed now, you as the owner of that technology can control the place where people are working, right? Before, it was where we would give them full access through an RDP connection, right? Or we would then give them just a user login, right? But now it's, and there's different platforms and stuff like that. Now, really, we're generally in one area, right? QuickBooks Online, you can create user profiles and user restrictions, right? So they only have access to certain clients. Same things with our share files, right? And our document storage managers, right? We can create practice management software, everything, right? We can create very restricted users where, based on your comfort level, you can give them access to what you would like to give them access to, right? So I highly recommend that, more so from the technology perspective, to look at that and give yourself, because now you're going to feel more comfortable in the majority of cases. You also have full control over it. I wouldn't recommend at this point anymore, like sharing backup copies of QuickBooks or anything like that. Really, you want to bring them into your environment where you can keep everything secure. Okay. So that's when it comes to that technology piece, right? The people aspect, I think I would touch more on, make sure you have a very clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities that you want somebody to do, right? Make sure you are involved in a lot of cases in the hiring process to some extent. It doesn't mean that you have the pick of the litter at all times, right? It doesn't mean that you can say, like, don't look for the 10 out of 10 person in a lot of cases, but think about what is important to you for that person, right? And what are the core areas that you really don't want to negotiate around? And then what are the good to haves, right? And then see how much you can help with that, right? And you don't necessarily need to be involved in and understand how to hire offshore, right? Somebody like Mohnish or somebody in the outsourcing space will do those elements for you, but be involved in maybe one interview, right? To really understand and make sure you can clearly articulate what you want to get across to them, is get to know them a little bit, make sure they're a good culture fit for your team. Those are the important factors where if you invest that time, it's going to pay off tenfold compared to just, hey, yeah, handle it for me completely. I'm really not interested in like doing that whole process. Because if you don't, you just need to be even more clearly defined when it comes to process and reporting, right? Because then we're treating stuff like a product rather than a person as to who it is. Okay. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of where I would go with it. And the platform as well, right? Again, it comes more around making sure that we have the right processes in place when it comes to that. What does the workflow look like for an individual? Okay. In a lot of cases, we maybe don't have a fully defined workflow. And we need to make sure that's very clear, because we're going to have cultural differences. We're going to have time zone differences in a lot of cases. We're going to have people that have worked maybe with different bookkeeping or accounting firms already. But I can tell you that the amount of times I've talked to firms and given, even if I would give the same project to one firm and then give it to 5 others, they're all going to have their own way that they like it done, right? The end result may be very, very similar, but the process that's followed internally and the way that you verify certain aspects and the way that you want it done and ask questions to your client and so forth is generally very different from firm to firm. So those are the elements we need to make sure are very clearly understood.
Excellent. I think the key aspect you touched about, mainly the process and the technology part, the tech part, I think it certainly plays a important role when there is a shift to this extent. We have seen many bookkeeping firms, and when they come to us and talk to us from technology perspective, having a custom solution for accounting, especially whether it could be white labeled or a platform which could be more secure for exchange of data. And we have seen many a times certain firms are very, very specific about the importance they give to the tech as a platform, and certain firms are not so much concerned about the entire package when it comes with. So, but I'm really glad you touched upon that point, that the technology role, which will be critical in this entire process of outsourcing. So I'm sure you've seen in this entire phase of guiding and consulting with hundreds of firms, you might have seen the good cases and the bad cases also. So I wanted to understand from certain real life examples, though you might have touched upon a few things, what are the common mistakes which certain firms make when they take a decision of outsourcing, but during the process there are certain mistakes which certain bookkeepers who are listening to this and hearing, and they should avoid those mistakes. So if you can touch upon certain mistakes.
So, I mean, I think the biggest mistake, honestly, is like I said before, is the expectation alignment, right, of roles, responsibilities that we need to have in place clearly, right, and the investment of time, right. Now, there's one element of investment of the monetary investment side of things, right, when you're hiring somebody, but it's so important to invest some time in preparing, right, for bringing that person on. I mean, think about it as though it's probably not your first hire, but your second hire. You probably invested a lot of time in preparing, making sure that their time was fully utilized in a lot of cases, or as utilized as possible. What firms tend to do, right, is wait until they are actually at 150% capacity themselves, right, before they even start hiring somebody else, right, rather than pre-planning and not being afraid that, okay, yeah, I'm going to invest in, I'm 80% full now. Let me get somebody so that I actually have time to train them and time to invest in them and get them ready to take on that next 60, 70% of work, right? And not worry about having them super busy necessarily day one, right? Generally, that investment, right, that you can make in them is hugely important. And if you overwhelm, and this is what I've seen where it's like outsourcing has come to the point of it's plug and play, right? So what we'll do is let's assign 20 projects immediately, right? And this is the amount of work I've got. I know I'm ready. Let's push 20 different bookkeeping projects offshore now, right? Let's fill up somebody's time day one, right? But then the problem is now when you're getting all that work back, you haven't had time to give any type of feedback, right? And now instead of giving feedback on smaller projects, right, now you're having to give feedback on 20 projects, and then it'll become a huge headache for you, right? So it's a good thing having the work there, but you've got to be ready to gradually give that work, right? And make sure that they clearly understand, because then once they really can spend more time on those projects and really get a deep understanding of how to do it and how you want it, you're going to be able to drop more and more projects to them at a time, really fill up their bandwidth, right? And you're also going to be able to train them on maybe higher level services already so that they can take on more of a client role than necessarily what you had implied or intentionalized to do, right? So that would be a huge factor that I've seen that firms just don't, a lot of firms have not invested that time, right? Or they've thought they've invested the time, but they've really just done it in not a gradual stage. They've just dumped a bunch of stuff on them without any training, any real true investment of that. They've gone over once. Yes, this is how I want it, right? They've maybe got on a few calls with giving some feedback, but that's not really the same investment we would do if we were in the office, right? Generally, you're going to go and do lots of shadowing, right? You're going to have them come. They're going to come and ask you a question. And when they're in person asking you, you are not as defensive as you are over a call or a video, right? It's very difficult to build that relationship. So it's like, then it becomes more of like, oh, I've got on another call and it's dragged on for this long, rather than like, you'd probably do the same thing in the office and you would spend a lot more time though with those team members, right? But then you also get a better result, right? So with that in mind, we now need to bring our tracking down and reporting to less relationship-based and more the fundamentals of like, okay, how efficient is somebody being, right? How much time are we investing? And this is where like that balance of virtual, and I say it as virtual, it's not just offshore, right? It's virtual. It could be domestic employees, but not in the office, right? But virtual to in-house, right? We need to create that balance, and everyone needs to be on a level playing field, right? From an investment perspective and from a how we assess people as well.
Interesting. I think this explanation certainly helps in preparing the expectations and the mindset while anybody is thinking about the outsourcing aspect. Uh, Often we hear about many models of engagement with the offshore teams or extended teams. So we've heard certain jargons like FTE, project based, BOT, or even captives. So can you just throw some more light on each of this model in a brief so that we get a little idea in choosing which model could be right for people and to suit their size and goals?
Definitely. So, I mean, first recommendation personally is if you are an AI CPA member, right, go to there. You can type in outsourcing AI CPA, offshoring AI CPA. I built out a best practice toolkit. So all the members have access to that. You can go on, you can see the different models in detail. You can see the different geographies, right? So that all that information is there. If you're not an AI CPA member, reach out to me through Mohnish and I'll give you a PDF copy, right? Now you've got access to that information. That's free, right? It's just something I built out for educational purposes. But to give you a high level, right? I mean, I see it as a spectrum, right? At one end of the spectrum, right, we've got building your own captive, right? So that is, you are ready to make an investment. It's going to be your office. It's going to be your business, right? Very high risk, right? High investment at one end. And then all the way on the other end is going to be true traditional outsourcing, where you have no control necessarily over the people side of it, who you're working with. It's very project based. It's very, hey, it's generally done still a lot in tax returns, right? Or maybe cleanup projects, right? Give us the work, let us do it, right? Bases on the quality of the work, judges on the results, right? And we're going to help you, right? At this end, we've got to be much more standardized, much more trusting, right? And it's lower risk because you're paying a set amount for the project in a lot of cases, right? And you're not having to manage team members. You don't have to then keep people busy necessarily. It's yours. It's super flexible, right? But we need to make sure that we've got the right controls in place, right? Because otherwise you're going to have results coming back, a different person working on it every time, right? And those types of aspects. Now, as we go a step in, at this end, we've got what's called the BOT now, right? So, and again, it's been out there. There's global delivery centers, a GCC, global capability center. But the big idea of the BOT, right? And I also hear BOTT now as well, right? Is build, operate, and transform, right? Or build, operate, transfer, and then now transform as well, right? So they're bringing like the digital AI automation piece to it. But the big concept there is you're building a captive. However, you're building it with an outsourcing firm that will take hold of all the compliance piece for you, right? You don't have to worry about that. The first year to 2 years, really you just worry about the workload, right? And understanding how will you eventually take over that captive, right? And take on those internal responsibilities, HR, management, IT, all those functions that you need in a business, right? You will eventually take that over, right? Sometimes you pay a certain fee for that. Sometimes you pay like a transfer fee per person, right? Or there's a set fee. It really varies, right? Hasn't been done many times in accounting firms right now, but it's been done for years with businesses, right? Because it reduces your risk of entry when it comes to building your captive. But then when you hit certain goals of could be 30 people, could be 50. I recommend closer to 50 people, but you can do it with less, right? But 50, 60, 100 people, right? But then there's a transfer of ownership, right? So now this is your entity. It's your people you've invested in, right? But you will eventually take full control, right? The operate stage is where they'll teach you all those facets, right, that go into it, right? And then they'll do the transfer, right? Typically, it's a 3 to 5 year process, right? Typically. I've seen some cases where the firm says at the 5 year, 3 year stage, they're like, when I should be transferring, I actually like what you're doing in these areas. I do want to take more ownership and more control, but I really don't want to get into the compliance piece and the governance piece. I don't want to do the payroll piece. I don't want to do these aspects in the background. Can you guys keep doing that? And then there's maybe a fee arrangement or there's something that goes on, right? But it gives you an entry point, right? Generally for bigger firms, in my opinion, or for firms that really know they're going to scale and put people on the ground. We move up to the other end, right? We can go, as we're going down, right? Now you go from project, you can base it on people. So an FTE approach. Sometimes that's a managed approach where maybe you don't have full control over individuals, but you have control over like, okay, I'm working with a manager. He's helping me with this team, but we are dedicating at least a full-time person's worth of work, right? Full-time employee or part-time employee PTE, right? You go down a step further. Now you've got sort of dedicated individuals, full-time employees, part-time employees, but it's still an outsourcing firm, right? So you still have good cadence there, right? In terms of they've got operations that can help you. They've got managers that can help you and step in for cultural problems, operating procedures, stuff like that. And then one that's in the middle, I would say that, again, it fits CPA firms and accounting firms pretty well in the way that we manage is the employer of record model, right? Now, again, that can go from like a traditional PEO style where they just handle payroll and they just handle the compliance piece of hiring somebody, up to some of these employer of records now will have an office, right? So, okay, you've got infrastructure there, right? You've got, okay, we've got people that you can reach out to for operational support or for HR issues and things like that. And there's sort of like a stepping stone going towards more of the traditional outsourcing model. The benefit of that is they're never going to be interfering with the operational workflow, right? They are there to be the mediator for hiring talent, right? And getting talent on board and doing it legally, right? And making sure you're doing the right things from a HR perspective, but they're not going to interfere and tell you how to do your bookkeeping, do your tax, right? Or they're not going to help with training necessarily or any of those factors. So there's really a big spectrum, right? And this is where you've got to understand like where is best fit for you operationally.
Oh, interesting. I think that certainly needs a good hand holding from people like you who can really guide in terms of what fits where. So in terms of if I have to just break down the process and from the time perspective, it could be, if you can just take a generic example of a mid-stage firm, right from the preparation stage, whether it is could be internal processes, alignments, documentation and SOPs, and then finding a right outsourcing partner and then stabilizing the operations. So if we were to break down these three phases, and if you can just give us some idea how much time it normally takes to bring this entire change within the organization.
So it depends on the size of the firm a little bit, right? I mean, if it's a larger firm with a decent amount of employees, I see it more as change management projects, right? You can't do too much too quickly because otherwise you're going to more likely break a system, right? And people are going to be less adept to changing, right, that quickly. But it's not a huge amount of time, right? It's really a small firm is a bit of education, right? Let's go and look at our processes over the next week or two, right? Let's make sure that we've got a framework, a basic framework in place, right? So I would say a couple of weeks, really, for a small firm, right? And I say categorize a small firm as a solo up to maybe a 6-7 person firm, okay? Because there's less change that's needed necessarily, right? Now, also, it does depend on how systematized the firm is, right? At the end of the day, I mean, if they've really got nothing documented, it takes some time to do so, right? However, really a couple of weeks, you can get it moving. As you move up the ladder, could be a month to 2 months. I mean, even some big firms, like I've worked with a larger firm, and you would think, okay, much more systematized. But that's not always the case, right? The way that a CPA firm has grown and the way that accounting firms, they've generally built on the partnership model, right? Which means that there's a lot of separation within the firms, within different office locations, right? They generally have an office manager that is going to be the coordinator, right? That is setting systems, processes up that may differ from the next firm, right? So, I mean, I can tell you from a top 50 firm in the US, right? It was very much like that. They had to spend 6 months making sure that they were more centralized as a firm before they took the step to really build their own captive, right? Now, that's not everybody though, right? Sometimes they do grow with a good system in place and structure. In that case, you can probably go much faster, right? I mean, you can go within 3 months, but it's not something that needs to be perfect, right? Is my big piece there, right? It's not about delaying hiring too long as well, right? Because at the end of the day, you're probably looking into it because you need to hire, right? Or you need to do something. So you can start working on it. But if you start using an offshore or an outsourcing firm, the big understanding you need to have is my expectation of the work coming back will not necessarily be exactly how I want it, right, at this stage, because you need to make it get to that stage, right? So you can either do pre-planning, right, or you can do a mixture, right? And even when you pre-plan, you still need to make sure you're working with them, getting to understand the individuals. Just because you planned to perfection doesn't mean that now the outcome is going to be the same, because they may have somebody like you, Mohnish, or they may have somebody else, right, who has different skill sets, different ways of working, right? So it's about finding that fit, right? Everybody knows if you've hired people, you know, from one person to the next, they're not identical, right? So we need to try and help make it as close as possible. And then we put our tweaks in place and make sure we're providing feedback to get to a comfort point for ourselves. Okay.
Okay, interesting. So I understand maybe the size of the firm would define probably by and large how much time it should take around these processes, but one should consider 3 to 4 weeks in the initial preparation phase and probably a couple of months depending on the size of the projects, what I understand. So
Correct.
yeah. So are there any specific tools or templates or any rituals or you can suggest for, or you have any specific things which can ensure accountability and communication between the onshore and the offshore teams?
So when it comes to the communicate, so I mean, well, let's say from my tools perspective, right? I mean, I built out an assessment, right? Self-assessment to understand internally in the firm, right? One of those areas that we cover is communication, right?
Yeah.
So we need to make sure we're using tools appropriately for that, right? And reporting comes in play with that. But stuff like even MS Teams, even Slack, right? Not just having the tool there, but having a process and a system of how to use it is very important, right? How do we escalate a project, right? How do we make sure we set the right deadlines? If, let's say, for example, if we're working with an outsourcing firm and they are, they work until 12 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Eastern, right? So there's a good amount of time for overlap, right, from where I am. But then there's 4 or 5 hours in the day where they're not accessible, okay? We need to make sure that we're not giving a deadline that we need to get it back to the client, for example, at 12 p.m. Eastern on the day that they're working, right? It needs to be either a day before, right? So we need to reassess a lot of these types of things, right? And I would say that the important piece there is when we talk about tools is have a clear communication tool like a Slack, like a Teams, right? Whatever you want to use, right? I would highly recommend as well having in-person meetings like this, right? So get on a Zoom, right? Get on a Teams again and make sure you're actually building a relationship. Project management or workflow tools, hugely important for this, right? Asana is a big one, Asana that I see a lot of smaller firms using in a lot of cases, right? TaxDome for some of the tax ones, right? But then we see some of the larger workflow management systems as well, right? Canopy, I think, has some tools there as well. We've got, what's the other one? Carbon is a huge one, right? That I feel like is growing in the US as well. But making sure those pieces are in place, it creates a lot of visibility for us as the owner or as the partner in the firm, and it creates a lot of comfort, right? When we can see where the projects are along the workflow, right? And we can communicate based on that, right? If you lose visibility, right, that is what creates discomfort. That's what creates you staying up at night and thinking, okay, is this person going to be able to get this done for me tomorrow? Because I don't necessarily know where this project is in the pipeline right now. And it creates a lot of what's the best word to say it? Well, it creates a lot of risk in the process, number one, but it also creates a lot of discomfort, right? Because you're the one that's going to be stressing about it. You haven't necessarily got the team members on board with feeling like it's their responsibility or their accountability right now. So you need to build that, right? But making sure you bring everything back to numbers, right, of clear accountability is so much better, right? Rather than let me do, I know a bunch of smaller firms that they'll do quarterly reporting or quarterly assessments with their team. They'll sit with them on a bi-yearly basis or a yearly basis, right? But really the discussion comes around, okay, how are you doing, right? How is everything going? Is there anything we can work on? And these are questions that they're good questions, but you've got no basis to go off right now. So you need to have the basis of like, okay, this is where you sit in your performance. This is where we want you to be. This is where you are, right? How do we get you here, right, is the big thing. So until you have that data, right, it's very difficult to have very, very meaningful and good staff meetings, right, to make sure that you can get them from here to here, right? So that's where I really stress, like, get away from the relationship aspect a little bit, right? And go towards like, okay, let's have the fundamental reporting in place so that we can have clear metrics for those conversations, and they'll be the drivers for it, right? Then you can have areas of your meetings to build relationship, right? But we want to make sure everybody's on a level playing field.
Excellent. The communication and accountability would remain the key pillars in the process of execution. And I mean, one of the common thing which I've been seeing when it comes to outsourcing as a phase, a lot of smaller firms still think that outsourcing is only for the big guys. And is that the mindset you see often? And if so, then how do you usually help them rethink about it?
So I would say some, right, have thought that way. I mean, I'll tell you, there's always gonna be a set of firm owners that don't want to outsource, right? Now, what I would say to that is you've got to understand all your options, right? The term outsourcing, right, is very broad, right? And you can use talent within the US, right? You can use talent within South America, right? If you find going one step further, right? You find using the Philippines, India, right? I mean, Philippines and India are the two most common areas in a lot of cases, right? But I can tell you that obviously you've got the big four, right, that have been really outsourcing for the past now 40 years, right? So you've got like a depth of talent, right, that you can, it's a new talent pool for you that you can leverage. I know small firms from sole practitioners to like just very consistently smallish firms like that have grown drastically because of outsourcing and offshoring. And they've been doing it now for 20 years plus, right? So it's not new, but I think the big thing is it's just that a lot of people maybe haven't been as involved with it, right? Because it hasn't been a everybody's doing this type approach unless you've been in the big four, right? If you've been in small, what you'll find though is now, I think it's a huge skill to know and need to know for even incoming students, right, that are coming into the accounting profession, right? We really need to make sure they understand that it's not a threat. It's something they need to leverage, right? when they're doing it. And I've heard, I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and one of the people was saying that one of the firm owners, brand new out of college, started his own firm, went that route rather than going to anybody else, literally just started it from scratch, but leveraged offshore talent day one to make sure the work was done. And he's now thriving, right? He's doing very good. He's got a multi-million-dollar business going on, right? I mean, and he's really been the one that's done like, okay, the feedback, the client relationship aspects, right? All those types of things. But he started by using offshore talent because he went the route of, okay, I've only got a few projects. Let me make sure I use an offshore team that can be flexible. I don't need to dedicate a full-time person. So it actually becomes a great tool to use. You get cleanup jobs in bookkeeping so often that it's like, okay, I don't have to, now I've got to find 10 hours, 30 hours to go and do this cleanup project when I've already got my book of business, right? No, I mean, okay, but that's not consistent. So hiring somebody would be very difficult for that, right? Go and use somebody virtually, go use somebody offshore for that block of 25 hours. Now you've got 5 hours of review that you still need to do, right, to be involved in it. But the big thing there is now it also hasn't cost you so much that you can still make money on that, right? So it's a great way, great starter piece, right? So I would just really push small firms. You should be exploring it more fractionally than necessarily even the big firms. They're looking at it more strategically from a, okay, I need to incorporate it across all my teams now, right? That's a bigger challenge. The small player should be, hey, let me go and use this to actually keep growing right now because I've got less capacity on my plate.
Awesome. I mean, I always believe that, the small firms also brings in a lot of agility, unlike larger organizations. Probably it might help them to take decision faster. Is that the case also?
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, like I mentioned about the change management. I mean, it's a big firm we've got to think about more people that are involved in that decision in a lot of cases. If I change something, it's going to change the roles and responsibilities of a lot more people, right? And the involvement than necessarily a small firm. We're running, we're still trying to grow in a lot of cases. So we've got to be agile, right? We've got to have people that trusted people we can go to, right? Or trusted businesses we can go to and say, hey, I need this cleanup project done, right? Can you help me with that, right? And get it done in a good amount of time so that then you can be on to the next thing, right? So this creates, in a lot of cases, a lot of adaptability. And what you'll find is it may be individuals. I would recommend working with businesses personally, right? When it comes to the outsourcing and offshoring, I think due diligence is a big need, right? Make sure you know who you're working with. Make sure they've got, again, you've got different levels of comfort. You may want infrastructure. You may want SOC 2 compliance, right? You figure out what you need and what makes you comfortable. That's how you make your decision as who you work with, right? But also they've got to be a fit for you, right? You got to like who you're working with. And this is where I get away from don't think about it always from the employee perspective. If Mohnish, you're a business owner, right? If they're working with you, they need to be comfortable bringing you to have an advisory type conversation and saying, how do I do this better as well? Because that's where they're going to really get good value out of working with outsourcing firms.
Excellent. And I think that gives a good input for all sides of firms to think through about outsourcing if they have not really given a thought about it. So if we just, before we wrap up, I would love to hear from you. How do you see this industry going forward? If you just fast forward a few years from now, probably 3, 4, 5 years onwards, how do you see the industry going forward, and what changes it can bring it to the people who are still on the edge of thinking whether to go for outsourcing or not?
So it's a growing market. It's getting more competitive though, right? So keep that in mind, right? It's easier to get started earlier to learn it, right? Because it takes years to master it, right? You're not going to master it day one, right? And also when we're dealing with people, we've got to make sure that we're building out career paths for them, right? So especially if you are taking more ownership of the offshore talent, right? I see a lot more firms investing heavier now into career development for their offshore team, just like they would their internal team. I see a lot more investment in, okay, I've been working with them for 2-3 years now. I'm actually going to, even if I'm not going to take ownership necessarily of it, I'm still going to treat these team members that are offshore like my team members. members, right? I'm going to invest in them the same way. I want to treat them well so that they stay with us, right? So that's a very important aspect that I feel like more firms are looking at now. So I definitely see that swing towards the employer of record model more now, where if we are looking for staff, we're looking at having a bit more sort of ownership and understanding of doing it, right? And having these as our team members. I see a huge uptick in usage, right? In terms of the number of firms that would previously in a conversation say, I'm never going to offshore, I'm never going to outsource. That has become a lot more of a norm and it's more comfortable. So there's been a huge amount of people that have said, you know what, I'm going to try it, right? I'm going to try it. And I've got an understanding. I know it's not going to go perfect, but so there's only a small percentage of top firms now that I can say that really don't offshore in any way, right? And even if they're not offshoring, they're looking at either nearer shore options, right? So the South America options, right? Or they're looking at lower cost geographies within the US, right? Lower cost states so that they can do more virtual work or remote hiring. That is sort of like the first step to take, right? In terms of if you're really worried about going offshore, go within the US, but start to learn about what it looks like, even remote hiring, right? So that you don't have that opportunity to bring them internally. That's where I think we're going to see a lot more of that remote hiring going on.
I think outsourcing has been the success mantra for most of these large firms, and probably one of the foundational reasons for their scale up. So thank you, Laurence. I mean, I think you shared all your insights and experience today with us, and this session has been really insightful. And I think to the audience, you have really given them enough inputs to think about outsourcing and think in this direction. So everyone who is listening to this, you can reach out to Laurence in case you need hand holding and understanding the process, how you can implement and think about outsourcing for your own firm, whether it is aligning people, process, choosing the right model. I'm sure all these guidance can come from Laurence very effectively. Laurence, any closing thoughts from your side?
No, again, like you said, more than happy to have conversations, right? More than happy to hear about what you're doing and give you some opinions as to how you can do it better if you need some help, right? I've built out tools that are free that you can utilize, right, to assess what your firm looks like right now, some best practice toolkits to go and read. I've built an education course, right, that really goes fundamentally into everything, right, to build out that roadmap for a firm now. So there's different things that I've built out, which is really there for you and built out for a small firm, right? It's built out so that you can understand. My first point is this profession is really built on that CPE model, right, of learning, right? We want to learn. I want to take the risk away from people by teaching, right? So come, ask questions, more than happy to help in any way.
Excellent. So everyone who is tuning in today, if you are at that point where outsourcing is on your radar, now is the time to reflect on your readiness. So drop your biggest takeaway from today's session. I will request you to share in your chats and comments, and feel free to reach out if you have any more questions. Thank you, Laurence, once again, and thank you all of you for joining us today. Thank you,
Mohnish.
Thank you for sparing time today, Laurence.